I think it's changed our lives in ways that we never could have imagined. But since May 25, when a gentleman, a 46-year-old black man was, George Floyd, died in Minneapolis when a white police officer knelt on his neck and for almost 9 minutes as he was begging for his life, and we all saw it in that video. We've seen protests that are also unprecedented in the United States and across the world. And I'm sure that here in Ukraine, this has also resonated. And so as a representative of the United Nations, I wanted to initiate this discussion to hear from you. How is that perceived in Ukraine? What does it mean for the people of Ukraine? And let me just mention that on June 4th, our UN Secretary General, and I quote him, he said that the plague of racism prompted by a murderous act of police brutality that led to widespread protests in the US is another urgent challenge besides the COVID-19 pandemic. The position of the United Nations on racism is crystal clear. This scourge violates the United Nations Charter and debases our core values. Every day in our work across the world, we strive to do our part to promote inclusion, justice, dignity, and combat racism in all its manifestations. Now, I know that in Ukraine, support to the Black Lives Matters movement was also linked to rallies around police brutality and violence caused by a few cases. I want but our discussion is also broader on issues of discrimination. And I think this is an opportunity for us it's an opportunity to discuss and to hear from you what it means for people here in Ukraine, how we can combat it, what we can do more about it. Personally, if I may share with you just my own personal background, my undergraduate degree was in African studies. I lived in Africa. I studied very deeply the history, particularly of apartheid in South Africa. And the issue of racism has been on my mind as a American that lived in the US. So now living here in Ukraine, I really look forward to hearing from you, experts, activists, academics, to see what it means here, how this is reflected here, and what we together and us as the United Nations can do more about this. So I guess we can go to the first round of questions to ask. What is the most common form of racism and discrimination in the Ukrainian context? And I think we'll be hearing from Vyacheslav first, and then followed by Sheilata Volabi and Issa Diallo. So Vyacheslav, please, I pass it on to you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Доброго ранку. Доброго ранку. Доброго ранку. Доброго ранку. Отже, я спробую дуже коротко, насправді.
Take into consideration is that the Ukrainian context is.
Can you put me on mute so that we can?
The first thing you need to take into consideration is that the Ukrainian context is totally different from the North American and Western European one because of the different historical, cultural context difference, absent of this post-colonial story, and so on. So Ukraine is not very attractive, to be honest, for foreigners, especially from, not especially, but also from Asian and African countries. So we don't have quite numerous new diasporas who are, first of all, targets of the racism and discrimination in Western countries. So we are in a totally different context. I will not speak about the discrimination problem in general. I deal with monitoring of hate crimes. And according to our monitoring, I need to stress that the level of racist violence in Ukraine is not really serious. We had much more problematic period about 10 or even 5 years ago. So the dynamics is positive, and it is what I need to mention first. Second, that the victims of racist hate crimes, they are, as in other European countries, foreigners from Africa, sometimes from Asia. When we speak about traditional Ukrainian minorities, I need to stress that the situation with Roma people is the most dangerous, and not only because of violence, but because of general discrimination and problem with integration to the society. Roma people face social isolation, problem with education, and I need to say that our government does not make enough efforts to counteract this situation, and we are worried about it. Speaking about other types of hate crimes like anti-Semitic ones, I need to say that we have more about hate-motivated vandalism than cases of direct violence. Since the beginning of the year, we registered only one case of anti-Semitic violence in Ukraine, and other types of traditional for European countries types of xenophobia, like Islamophobia or migrantophobia. Only several cases we have during here. The last point I want to stress is that the major problem about hate crimes, as for me, is a reaction of the law enforcement bodies. I have to strongly stress on that efforts of the national police and other law enforcement bodies are not enough, that a lot of cases of xenophobic violence and other types of hate crimes were not punished. And it also connects to the violent attack against Roma people, which were more numerous 2 years ago, but this problem still exists. And I think that the activization or more real motivation of the work of law enforcement bodies is what needs to be done from the side of the government in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think you've raised a lot of issues really also about the issue of impunity and justice, which is certainly also of interest to us. I should mention that the Secretary General also has a strategy to combat hate speech that we are now looking also to see what that means in the Ukraine context. But I'm wondering if Sheila Tafolabi, to hear from you, I think Vyacheslav said there isn't that much racism like it is not such a big issue here. Do you agree with that? And how do you see the issue of racism here in the Ukrainian context? I think you're muted.
We can't hear you.
We cannot hear you. Oh dear.
Sheila, sorry, we cannot hear you, unfortunately.
Так, мене чути?
So do you get me now? So thank you so much. If you do allow me, I'll use Ukrainian because my English will not be clear for everyone. Sorry for that. And I do agree with Vyacheslav on the issue that, yes, truly, right now we can see that there are not so many bright manifestations of racism and discrimination. Thank God we don't have it. But if we do talk and if we remember how it happened 10 or 15 years ago, we've had more of these cases. If we take the events happening in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement and all these protest waves, so we will see that in Ukraine, people started supporting the movement and it led to this very vibrant discussion and the response from people. So we can see right now that we have sharp increase of, let's say, the white power is showing its presence. They've activated these organizations. In Kyiv, what we can see, what we can hear, that it's happening. So they become active. But right now, cases and manifestations, if we speak about the hate crimes or the racism-based crimes, so we haven't seen these. We haven't faced these. So our organization, together with the partners, we try to develop the lawyers network, so specialist experts who provide legal aid, people who protect others from discrimination and hate crimes. Also, we cooperate with the National Police of Ukraine. We analyze and study the facts on. We actually study and analyze how these crimes are being investigated, and we can see that this is a huge, comprehensive, complex problem. So, on one hand, we have lawyers who, unfortunately, they don't have, let's say, judicial practice, enough of practice on how these crimes are investigated. Therefore, we don't have enough expertise, and lawyers, they don't have enough knowledge, basically, how to act to protect their clients. Still, they don't. And police, when they actually face such challenges like hate crimes, they try to investigate the crime. They want to hold the perpetrators liable. Ukrainian legislation so far is not perfect. It's really hard to prove that there was a motive when it comes to hate crime, that there was actually hatred. And we can see that these crimes are not investigated properly. Unfortunately, this is a big problem. Together with partners, we continue actually working on that. We try to think how to improve this situation. And I support Vyacheslav, his words that the majority of manifestations, racist manifestations, it's clear from media. We can see it in the media and we can just walk in the street. So the manifestations of racism regarding, so again, the Roma people, they suffer from it first, and the black skin, the dark skinned students. So we can have some insulting words that people use to talk to them and so on. Concerning the effect on people's lives, so something that we actually faced. So representatives of we do have cases when people simply are not taking into certain positions. They cannot get a job because of their colors, the color of their skin, and it also I was also affected by that. I can tell you, I had these situations, and thing is, we cannot respond to that properly. Unfortunately, the situation is like that, and unless we find a proper solution, a proper mechanism to change it, unless we manage to help our lawyers to be active in these cases, to police investigate the cases, we still cannot say that discrimination is completely combated in Ukraine. Unfortunately, no.
Thank you very much. And I think the issues that you touch on are very relevant to some of the work that we are also trying to do. Certainly, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, but also, you mentioned it was mentioned that there aren't that many foreigners or coming, but you did mention students, for example, And also, when you look at the future of Ukraine, I think the issue of more migration from different countries, I think, is something that is going to be in the future. So discussing these issues and addressing them, I think, is very important. And looking forward to hear Issa Diallo from the African Council of Ukraine, your perspectives from your experience, please. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you.
Доброго дня, чи можна говорити?
So can I talk?
Перепрошую, зараз ми хочемо передати
Sorry,
слово
right now,
Діало.
Issa Diallo is about to speak,
Аудіо, чи інші чують пане?
but we don't have the connection. There's no sound, unfortunately.
Issa, can you hear us? We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Can you try changing the settings?
Okay, now we hear you. Please, go ahead.
Добре, дякую.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to express gratitude for the organization of such an event. I will actually use Russian if you don't mind, if it's okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you for your invitation to take part in this event. And truly, the topic is very, very, very important, because after the American events, after the American case, the incident with George Floyd, so this is like a stimulus, a push for us. So the whole globe, the whole world opened its eyes, and we finally started understanding that there is discrimination. It actually exists, and this issue requires certain serious approaches to find solutions. So concerning, let's say, Ukrainian context, I would say, maybe to confirm or to repeat what the previous speakers said, the ideas, the statements, just to confirm. Yes, racism as it is, there is no maybe actual racism, or it cannot be simply compared to something that's happening in the US or elsewhere in Western countries. In Ukraine, yes, racism is manifested, but we cannot say it's absent, fully absent. It would be a lie. No, absolutely not. No, it's hypocrisy. We cannot say that, but it's there. It's there. Maybe it's hiding behind certain facade. I don't know. It's not that clear. It's not manifested that openly, especially when it comes like to African people of African origin, because they are more bright. Let's say they are easily traced. Let's say due to the color of their skin and the appearance, and especially when people want to take certain positions, when they want to apply for a job. Yes, we can state that they do feel this burden of discrimination, because they're sometimes officially, sometimes it's unofficial, sometimes it's like concealed. And yes, people try to refuse in some diplomatic way, but people do understand that the skin of their color is the only reason to get this refusal. So this is very insulting, and sometimes, yes, it's painful. It's painful, and we simply need to draw your attention to that, because when it comes to qualification, talent, and competence, I don't think that these people are worse than anyone else. So if they do want to apply for a job, and everyone should get an opportunity to actually apply. So we need to give these people opportunities to actually express themselves. This is a problem, I guess, in my opinion, when it comes to job applications. Okay, so education. We may have some, certain moments in the educational area, and sometimes African people, they do feel like they are, let's say, lower even than other foreigners. I don't know why. For example, people coming from Arabic countries, from Middle East, China, India. So quite often it happens that the attitude to Africans is a little bit more controversial, so they are in the bottom of the list somehow. And if certain requests are there or tasks, these people are taken, as last one, as reserve. Even if it's not racist, maybe, but it's insulting still. And African students take this kind of attitude, even deprived of aggression, so they still take it as an insult. And the third moment is about the manifestations, where it's manifested. When people look for accommodation, for flats, apartments and houses, yes, for African people, it's not very, easy to find a proper apartment. So those people who can buy it, of course, it's easy. But when you actually want to hire an apartment, for example, landlords, sometimes through agencies, they are ready to, let's say, take everyone. But when they actually find out that African person wants to live there like for a year or half a year, so they will find the reasons to refuse any reason, or they simply will not provide the premise to these people. This also is a moment that we need to be careful with and to draw your attention to. Cooperation with law enforcement, I do think that, yes, there are many improvements. I can see them, and it's being advanced. And it has become better in general. It has become easier to work with law enforcement, better attitude, and more respect from them. Even the last time when I was escorting people from my country to the local police precinct, I was so pleasantly surprised, because this separate room where people are interviewed, and we had police officers, who actually responded to our questions, and they instantly started looking for certain solutions, and they helped us. So, I can see that, yes, the attitude has changed for better. But on the other hand, when we have certain issues, certain conflicts between Africans and Ukrainians, let's say, yes, so this hope for Africans to get some proper consultation, or if an African is attacked, so to have the proper investigation process. So we all want, of course, the perpetrators to be held liable, but it's highly unlikely for African people to get justice, to get proper justice. So when Africans simply come to police precincts with their problems, like the documents are lost or anything else, usually these people are taken properly. But again, when it comes to investigation of certain conflicts, when Ukrainians are involved or people of other nationalities, yes, we may have certain obstructions. And quite often it happens that if even the African person is absolutely correct, and so, even the article may be changed, so they can actually change the crime itself, so they can replace certain documents and so on. So we can simply need to take this into account.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Дякую. Thank you so much. Thank you. Maybe I'll have an opportunity to discuss it. Yes, thank you.
Sure. But I think Natalia wanted to come in to complement or to add something. Is that, please, Natalia, just on some of the points that were raised?
Доброго дня, пані Катерино. Доброго дня.
Miss Katerina, Miss Osnat, do you hear me well?
Yes.
First of all, we'd like to express our gratitude for this important conference that you organized, and to express our gratitude to the UN agencies for their support and attention to this issue, because we, as an organization working to protect women, of course, we have this multiple manifestations of discrimination, intersectional discrimination, especially in the east of Ukraine. We've prepared a report. Yes, this issue is present. This issue is very important for Ukraine. And we'll actually, within the last question, within the last block, we'll tell you what discrimination we do face quite commonly, quite often. And right now, we would like to express the gratitude for the participation in this event. And again, I want to tell you that, yes, it's very important. It should be discussed. In the third block, we'll actually provide you with more information regarding Ukraine, especially women who suffered from violence.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So going to the second question, and I think, you know, we through your interventions, a lot of issues are coming up. Certainly the gender discrimination, multiple discrimination. I think we heard on anti-Semitism, you know, and I think with the history of Ukraine and is still there, but can we go to the next question to see what do you think are the roots of racism and discrimination in Ukraine? So can I pass it on to Alexandra Romantsova to speak, please?
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, great.
Thank you. So as I think one of the main reason which now given the high influence for the question of not only xenophobic action, not only in race basic, but as for me, more problem we have with ethnic basic, because here in territory of post-Union and territory even post-Russia Empire, so that's more was a tradition of ethnic discrimination, and maybe not so really in race, because not so many people with different like visible differences like color of skin or something was present here. But if we will speak about ethnic roots, it's that was a reason of different discrimination from really old times. So it's as for me, it's one of the problem. It's a pity, but it's traditionally. And second is a question that now we have a war here. So and it's one of the reasons started be more hard all the question about differences between people and using these differences for some interest of different groups. For example, you know, and my colleagues can support me in that question of peaceful demonstration now here, demonstration about peace. I mean, it's a really big problem, because now if you started speak about, for example, killing of 2 journalists from Russian Federation, which was killed by right-wing organization, it's Anastasia and Stas. And if you trying to make anti-war peaceful demonstration, you will be joined to the group who supports the Russia. So it's because we have some group influence who interested in that, like mix of this question. So if it's, as for me, now if we will speak about discrimination in ethnic or race base, here in Ukrainian, it's part of biggest question of discrimination, first of all, in the social levels, social stratification. Because if you will have money and you can spend it here, time with and buy something and showing that your social level with the money high, it's not a problem of color of your skin. It's a problem if you don't have money here. It starts to be a question, and that's why it's one of the part of this. And if we will speak about xenophobia, it's surely biggest in the region where the people have less possibility to have such contacts. For example, if we will speak about Ivano-Frankivsk region or Odessa region, where is a high level of representative of people with different color of skin, you like see a different race, not only heard about them, but you see people with a different race, and you have more private contacts. So it's a level of racism there. For one side, it's like in private, in opinion, less, but in question of have a conflict in this basic, we have more episodes there. For example, in Ivano-Frankivsk, because a lot of foreign students represent there. So it's really hard, really hard structured situation when you're trying to analyze where is some in one region more have a conflicts about its ethnic or race base, or where is it less. So as for me, it's how I told about that. It's three points like of reason. First, it's traditional. It's a pity, but it's a problem here because not so many representative of different people of different race in historical period will be here. Were here. And second, it's a war. It's using this question, one of this question for different group who wanna be fluent. And third point, it's a question of such some of daily questions, like for example, between two students, one of them foreigner or dark skin, and second was Ukraine. It's a start of the ethnic conflict because opinion, it started to be okay. It's some foreigner or some guy from other country, like push or pressure or like hit first of our Ukrainian student, and it started to be a question of this. But that was really daily conflict. So as for me, it's like situation like that, and we need to understand these 3 points. Thank you. Okay, we don't hear.
Don't hear you.
Yeah, we don't hear you because your microphone is off.
I just wanted to thank you and to say you've touched on some issues that we could have an entire discussion on each of them. You know, there's so many beautiful traditions in Ukraine, but you said that tradition is also keeps you closed in a way that can be problematic. And how do you balance that? On the issue of the conflict, I think you touched also, I mean, of course, from the UN, we want to work to advance peace, but and social cohesion. And this is not only about the conflict in the East. I think it's across the country. And the fact that it's difficult to talk about non-violence and peace, that it's captured by politics, I think is very problematic, and I think it's something that we want to understand and talk about more. I want to pass it on to Yana Salahova to also share what, in your opinion, are the roots of racism in Ukraine.
Thank you, Asnat, for this possibility. I would have maybe 2 comments on what just Sasha said. First, I would support her in the way that Ukraine has a long history in a way how we fight for our independence. And now we're once again in the period when we need to fight for it. And so it's no surprise that nationalism, ethnic centrism are so popular, and there is need in the wider population to recognize that we are quite unique, and this need, unfortunately, sometimes can overlap with, this value of diversity and need to live together with some other nations. At the same time, I would maybe argue about the tradition, because once again, Ukrainian history shows that its territory was a huge migration territory. So many nations, so many ethnicities move through it. And maybe they are not so visibly different, but anyway, they came with different culture, with different languages. And it might be that the state or the policy just don't pay attention to it. And so another reasons why I think that there are some roots of, let's say, for me, it's more xenophobia that would either lead to racism or different forms of discrimination, and that you just perceive other person as enemy, as some odd person. In USSR, our not very far history, there was such a thesis that there is no racism at all. You know, it was a culture to deny that there is some interethnic problems, and it came in our mindset. So now in Ukraine, what we inherit this culture of denial. There is problem somewhere, it's not here. Another reason, I would say, what Sasha said, we have a lot of, let's say, forms of discrimination in our ordinary communication, and just people are not sensitive to it. There is a lot of anecdotes, there is a lot of jokes, and there is just lack of culture of condemnation of all of it. People just will be surprised if you just stop him and say, hey, this is not polite, or this could be abusive. Say, what did I say? He even just will not recognize it. And maybe I would argue with Isa, we have actually, if we would compare with US, because I heard a lot of comments from US Peace Corps volunteers, that our, let's say, discrimination or xenophobia is quite bright and open. People will openly say to you what is wrong or why they think so, which is actually latent in US. And yes, it's more hidden, and obviously it's more institutionalized, but people will not openly say to you what they think, how they think, etc., etc. And so this is this kind lack of sensitivity we have in general, and lack of condemnation of such forms of xenophobia. And I would add that education system we have at the moment, also we inherited from our former structure, USSR, it would never appreciate critical thinking or maybe diversity as a value itself. And at the moment, we don't have any educational tool that really promotes to receive another experience through communication, through interaction. In the school system, I would say it's still lacking of this. And so people on different level would not have no possibility to practice this kind of habit, let's say, how to practice to value different experience I would receive of communication, of interaction with people of different culture, I don't know, habits, etc. And another last point, maybe it's psychological, maybe I would say it might be maybe typical to not only to Ukraine, but I think with that Ukrainians might sound like generalization, but because of this history, when we fight for our independence, we really like our image of being victim. And it's always difficult for us to recognize that there might be problems in us. In Ukrainian, it would sound like "Tsap vidbuvaylo." We need migrants, we need some foreigners, we need some other vulnerable and minority groups that definitely need to take responsibility for much more deep problems that we have in our own society, and we need to, let's say, recognize that this is our problem and we have to do something with it. This is maybe what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I've got like about 1 million questions and comments that I'd like to discuss with you more, but I want to hear all the others, and I'm sure many will reflect on what you've just said, and probably maybe in the same way that I want. Miroslav Greenberg, please, can you share with us your thoughts on what the root causes are? Thank you. You're muted. Miroslav, you're muted. You're great.
Да, здравствуйте.
Yes. good afternoon. Good afternoon. If I knew why in Ukraine we do still have racism, why it's still maintained, it would be great. We would find a solution how to fight it, but I don't know. So I'll just share certain assumptions. Yes, I think that maybe I'll repeat something from previous statements. I think that one of important reasons is that we don't have this habit, experience of recognizing, analyzing racism. It's being denied at all levels. It's denied even by victims of racism. And if there is no phenomenon, if there is no problem, we cannot know nothing of its roots, consequences, nothing. We can do nothing with it. And this absence, so like we don't have black-skinned people, we don't have racism. This is one of the reasons why we still have racism elsewhere. So it's also related to the fact that I think in many discussions, racism is perceived as something close to the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, racism is something about yellow-skinned or dark-skinned people, red-skinned people. Okay, I sound very rude right now, but sorry, I'm just quoting. Truly, racism is directed against ethnic roots, ethnic origin, cultural diversity. And so right now in our discussion, racism is tied simply to African Americans in the US. So basically, we don't have so many African people here in country like to have this social explosion, but we will not recognize it when it comes to Roma, for example, or other groups. A very interesting group, for example. So, for example, these cultures that are very different from Western, we perceive them as, strange or hostile. This is the first reason. Second reason is attached to the first. Anti-racists, they even reproduce these racist discussions. So they talk about races, closed, isolated biological groups, cultural groups. They use these messages, they use this narrative. And each representative of this isolated group has certain features, characteristics typical for the group, but not typical for other groups. And even representatives of the anti-racist group. So Roma people say that in their blood they have the liberty spirit, okay? And this is, again, the reproduction of racist discourse. And it's like it's anti-racists do support basically the racism in some ways. So they like keep the balance. They don't shift elsewhere to the left or the right. So they don't try even to fight it with these messages. So what else? For me, racism is a way to explain the inequality and diversity, yes? And if we do have only one way to do it, so we use it as an only method. The problem is that we do really have problems with educational, sociological background that would help us to explain social, economic, cultural, regional diversity. We don't have the background. And many people try to find this background in biological characteristics. Okay, if you're poor, you are stupid. That's the clear logic. If you're a Roma person, you are la la la. If you are a dark-skinned person, la la la. So we tie these characteristics to people due to their biology. It's a big reason. There is no discourse on what diversity is and what it should be. We have a huge number of strange metaphors, genetic metaphors in our blood. This is something that comes to our DNA. So we cannot genetically even perceive other culture, and this leads us to racist discourse in educational area, in social economic area. And this is a discourse. This is discourse not even of racists, politicians, average people. They reproduce racist messages. If only xenophobia would be a reason of racism, we could do something. We could fight it. We could send these people, let's say, somewhere to deprive them of access to media, let's say. Not censorship, but media. We need to understand who are in the media and who talks. But we don't have this. We don't have this reflection. We don't have this recognizing of the problem. What else? In education, we have a lot of complexions, a lot of problems. So people do think again, people refuse. If it does not exist in the society, but simply an educational area cannot form this habit, cannot take it as we don't have enough of proper narrative and enough of proper ideas for that. One more important thing that leads to racism, if you just focus on that, so racism would be eternal. So the attempt to present racism as a biological feature of a person. Okay, the system to identify friends or aliens. So basically, it's an indicator of hostility. Many anthropologists tell that this does not exist. So people who live in colonized countries, they first met their, let's say, future masters openly and sincerely, but some people do tell that xenophobia is something that is rooted deeply in our biology. Truly, if there is certain background for it, it's quite weak, so we cannot refer to biology and to genetics, so it cannot lead to racism. Racism, for me, in Ukrainian context, is about lack of lack of recognition. So, presence of racist discourse in any kind of conversation, racialization. So basically grouping people according to races. Okay, in East, like we have another culture. For me, this is the same racism when people say that Africans cannot perceive that high culture of white people in Europe. So for me, it sounds absolutely horrible. What I would do, starting from the upper level, to restore the discourse, at least to talk about racism as about a real phenomenon, something that exists, something not about something as we simply have in America, Africa, or Asia, and stop refusing. We also have that. We need to stop it.
Thank you, Miroslav. And you remind me that I read recently about a young Black woman student who has now, she convinced the Webster Dictionary, it's one of the most important dictionary in the world, to change the definition of racism, because she felt that the definition that is used, people were pointing to that definition and saying, you see, I'm not a racist. And she managed to convince them to add that it's about a systemic system. So it's not just about you personally saying, I'm not a racist, but it's the system that you live in. It was very interesting. But let's go on to the next speaker, Vladimir Chemeris. Please, Vladimir.
Добрий день. Чутно мене?
So do you hear me well? Okay, so thank you, Ms. Lubrani. Thank you, dear participants. Good afternoon. Yes, it's very important to talk about the roots of the problem of racism and other discrimination types in Ukraine, just to solve it, to defeat it. So you've raised a very important issue right now on the definition. It's very hard to define racism, actually, and we need to talk about discrimination as based on the color of the skin and ethnic origin should be put then, discrimination based on the sexual discrimination, of course, LGBT discrimination based on political opinions and beliefs. So this is a complex, a whole bundle of problems that we cannot break into smaller pieces. And Alexandra Romantsova also raised it. So just to start with, I'd like to draw attention that, yes, this individual xenophobia or individual everyday racism, also homophobia at individual level, in general, we do have it in Ukraine, a very small percent. I don't think I can compare it to the American level, but those people who still were born in the USSR, they were raised, anyway, as they still had this equality idea brought to them from the childhood. Yes, the problem emerged. It started actually becoming more and more serious recently, just the latest cases to remind you. So on June 1st, in Ternopil, dark-skinned students, African students, they decided to have this photo session. So the Black Lives Matter, they wanted to support this movement with photo session, and the hate speech campaign was instantly initiated in local media, and two local MPs from the city council from Svoboda Radical Party, they wanted these people to be deported from Ukraine for this flash mob. And another issue that we have, so Roma people, yes, it's the most painful, I guess, issue. That it's the group that suffers the most. They do feel not even discrimination from Ukrainians, but they are constantly attacked and murdered by other people. So we spoke about the murder of David Pop, a young Roma man who was murdered in Lviv in 2018. He was murdered by representatives of the ultra-right nationalist group. So it even is, they actually use the Nazi ideology, and 14 people were held liable for this crime. Still, they're under investigation, but we have 2 people who already are sentenced. But still, the way they classified the case, we can say that investigation process, the investigators did not identify their actions as xenophobic, so the punishment was mitigated heavily. And I want to say that 2018 was the year when we had this series of attacks in Roma camps in Lviv, in Zakarpattia, in Kyiv, the whole wave, and none of the perpetrators, none of the attackers, we can say almost none of them were held liable. So why I'm stressing so much on these problems? I just need to say another thing, that right now in Ukraine we have these mass attacks on the participants of the peaceful assembly that we had in June under the office of the president of Ukraine, supported by the Shari party. So we have the National Corps representatives, ultra-right organizations, supporters who attack these people. And so we can say that law enforcement officers, they basically ignore it, or they almost don't do anything. We have clear manifestations of discrimination. Basically, these attacks, why do we have these attacks? Why these people attack the manifestants? Because they want people to be intimidated, not to take part in peaceful assemblies, to actually to be afraid to express any opinions that are different from the government opinions or the ultra-right opinions. Why I stress on that? We need simply to know the subject of discrimination, what it is, the subject of attacks, and the subject of hate speech and violence when it comes to representatives, let's say people with other skin color, people with other ethnic origin, people with other opinions, other sexual orientation, and practically in all cases, in all cases, we have the representatives of ultra-right nationalist organizations. When we speak about the roots of problem, we just need to stress on this. Who is the subject? Who is the subject of these actions? The response of law enforcement. This is also very important. So the cases that I mentioned, it simply proves that the attitude these organizations to these attacks from law enforcement, let's say they fail to act, or they simply even somehow promote the attackers to act further. So a couple of years ago, we had the attacks of ultra-right representatives who attacked people of other ethnic origin, and the head of Kyiv police, who later became the deputy minister of interior, and he also is a member of such a right-wing organization. So another thing which would be very important, the majority of those people who attacked the Roma camps close to Lviv, they are the students of Kyiv schools, and recently we've had this scandal. So one of the deputy headmasters of the schools, she was posting on Facebook Hitler's portraits She was actually using the symbols and signs used by the Nazi. And so, like, she's the member of relevant organization. And so we say that government is not taking part in actually eliminating this problem, or they don't create conditions to tackle it. So this is something that we need to mention. We want to understand the reason of racism and xenophobia. And when we come to different discrimination, political, sexual discrimination, and also discriminating the LGBTI. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And I think you've touched on some very serious examples of hate crime that shows you that these problems exist here in this country, and more work that needs to be done. I'd like to move on. I know, and I again want to thank you for spending time with me today. I'm learning a lot, and I think for the United Nations it's so important to listen to you all. But several of you have offered to speak a bit on what you've observed in your workplace, that problems that are caused by discrimination, different discriminations. So I'll pass it on to Yevhen Netsvetayev, please. Yevhen.
Доброго дня всім. Мене чути?
Good afternoon. Am I there? Do you hear me well? Thank you, first of all, for invitation to this interesting event, and it's a very important topic because not enough attention, the attention is improper to this problem in our society. So Ukrainian Institute for Human Rights, what do we do? One of our areas is actually the prevention of improper attitude in the panel facilities. So we do visit the correctional panel facilities. We speak about prisons, actually. So we simply want to prevent tortures and improper attitude, improper interaction. So we quite often visit these facilities and we register different manifestations of discrimination there. One of these, well, basically, if we talk about panel and correctional facilities, you know that it's quite typical for them to have certain subcultures, let's say, and certain traditions. And we have certain stratification. So prisoners are broken into certain categories in formal stratification. As a rule, persons who so the parolees, they are the lowest caste. So we have representatives. We may have representatives of LGBT among parolees quite often, and these persons may suffer from internal violence from other prisoners, and quite often they are involved in certain dirty jobs. And some cases that I take from practice, like, for example, we have facts when people from these groups, they, let's say, live, or they even take food, in bathrooms. What is the reason? So they're being humiliated. The reason is that truly this situation, the administration of the panel facility, they do feel okay with that, so they don't want to tackle it. If due to this informal stratification, they have certain order, internal order, because these castes, these groups, they have their hierarchy, and the administration, the administration, they do know that this exists, but they sometimes even do support this problem. So we had cases when in internal documents in detention centers, we've identified even certain categorization of prisoners. These were broken into different subcultures using certain words, so people were even grouped with the use of certain words by the administration itself. So if we speak about the formal manifestations of discrimination, I just want to remind you that recently in the Ministry of Justice, they announced it quite actively, the reform of penitentiary service in Ukraine. And In this context, all the media announced about creation of these paid cells in detention centers with better conditions. So in fact, if you do have money, you can actually buy some peace and better conditions for you while staying under detention. In my personal opinion, this is direct discrimination when it comes to social status. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Justice and they have another opinion, unfortunately. So what I'm leading to, of course, first of all, we need to work. So the individual level, we need to start working with it. But when it comes to the head of the state, to the government, when even law enforcement sometimes do seems like they support it, this is a very, very, very bright manifestation. And these people do show example, like to other citizens, that you can do like this without any punishment. So in my personal opinion, we need to raise this more and more. We need to bring this message about discrimination, not just for us as for activists, human rights activists, CSO representatives, to dig deep. But unfortunately, our government changes so often, and we don't have this continuity, political continuity. So my proposal, maybe some more events, campaigns, involving the representatives of government and other state power bodies. I don't know if you do have the representatives, it would be really good for them to hear this, to know this, and to have an opportunity to analyze it and make certain conclusions out of that. Thank you, Ms. Lebrani. Thank you, dear guests.
Thank you, Yevhen. I think you raised... And I think, yes, we do speak a lot to the government, and I always feel maybe not enough to civil society activists. So this conversation is actually devoted to here listening to civil society. But I think, there's a discussion, as I think was said, to have specifically on penitentiaries, which is a complex issue. But I think what you raise is, I think in any organization, there is always a room to ask, are we being fully compliant with non-discrimination? And certainly the UN itself often asks that, whether it's about having gender equality and equality in hiring, etc. So I think definitely you've touched on the problem of institutionalized discrimination sometimes vis-a-vis prisoners in penitentiaries, which is very problematic based on sexual identity, etc. So let's go now to Ludmila Yanina to hear from you. Please, Ludmila.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
So dear participants, dear colleagues, good afternoon, Ms. Lebrani. Thank you, Katerina. I did not know up to the very end, would I get the floor today, because we had a huge queue. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yes, I'd like to talk about the institutionalization of discrimination, because if people, as citizens of Ukraine, as the population, if they, from the upper level, if they take this message or signal that some people can be discriminated easily just because the government already does that at different levels, so later they express it, reflect it, manifest these xenophobic ideas or opinions, they become racists, they discriminate and humiliate people just because the government basically does nothing to prevent it, to eliminate it. So we just need to talk, I would like, maybe have to talk about a couple of categories of the population, but I must be brief, I know that. So I'd like to concentrate on discrimination of representatives of the Roma community. Right now in Ukraine, according to different estimates, we have approximately from 250 to 400,000 people, and we have many NGOs and CSOs which do calculate these figures, and the Council of Europe. So the Council of Europe gave us 400,000 people and fewer people according to CSOs, but the state itself the last time they actually tried to estimate this figure, 2001, and after that, there was no intention to know how many Roma representatives would you have in Ukraine, so no one's interested, basically. And basically what the needs of the Roma are. If we take the data of the CSOs and the Council of Europe, we have many people and representatives of Roma community who are not registered without documents. So they are the stateless persons. And they simply cannot enjoy their rights, use social services, governmental services. So the state basically created a very, very, very burdensome procedure for these people to be registered, get their documents, and in this procedure, this is interrelated. So there is a vicious circle. So you cannot get a document without getting a document and previously getting a document. So there is, quite a difficult situation, and there is full absence of logic, basically in this state mechanism for registering the Roma people. That's how the person goes into this, again, as I mentioned, vicious circle, and they simply cannot tackle these procedures. They cannot get these basic documents. So they must go to CSOs, to NGOs, to get certain legal aid, to get some support, and only then maybe the lawyers support, representatives of Roma human rights organizations, just to get the documents. Because when the person is trying to overcome this bureaucracy, it's highly traumatic. It's highly humiliating sometimes, all these procedures, because the state power bodies, representatives, employees, they use very insulting language sometimes when they interact with Roma people, very humiliating words and statements they do use. This is unacceptable, of course, but so far, the CSOs, they try to work with this issue, but just to tackle it, we still are not there. Respectively, in Ukraine, since 1991, we already have 4 generations of Roma people. Let's say approximately 16,000 people who cannot receive pensions, who are not socially protected, who cannot receive proper medical assistance. Their children cannot be vaccinated, and they cannot send their children to schools. They cannot actually get social benefits and payments. They cannot get their degrees and cannot get vocational education, and they simply cannot apply for a job because they don't have documents. The other thing to be mentioned is that police fully ignores hate crimes committed against Roma people. And when Roma people who refer to get the support from police, they also face this humiliation and insult, and law enforcement simply does not do their job. Also, there are raids.
Yeah, I just think that we wanted. I think on the Roma issue, we've got a number of other representatives that also want to speak on this issue. I'm not sure. Did you want to also raise to speak on other topics or?
Зокрема, я би ще коротко я планувала
говорити. Just briefly, I plan to talk about discrimination of LGBTI community briefly, maybe. So homophobia at the state level, again, it's brought, I think, to higher levels because the society gets this signal, this message that, yes, you can humiliate LGBTIQ, and at legislative level, we have, again, many problems, many gaps, because people from this community, they simply cannot marry each other, they cannot adopt children, it's prohibited. They cannot visit their partners in intense care wards. They cannot become the blood donors. I don't know why, because certain precautions are there, and also hate crimes. So the police does not classify the hate crimes properly. So when, for example, there is a crime committed against LGBTI or Roma people, police somehow tries to mitigate the actions, mitigate the crime. So they simply help the perpetrators, and they use the other article, which clearly will not help us to hold the perpetrators liable. And unfortunately, the perpetrators are not punished properly, and they can easily avoid the responsibility.
Thank you. You know, I think we're hearing a lot about this issue of impunity, of access to justice, the issue that you mentioned on statelessness, of not having documentation, which affects particularly the Roma population. I'd like to, if you don't mind, we move on to the next speaker, because we've got a lot of other people that want to come in. But Mykola Yurchenko, if you could maybe also share your experiences with us, please. I pass it on to you.
So good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Mykola Yurchenko. I'm the head of the NGO Roma of Ukraine Ternipe from Lviv, and I represent the coalition of Roma NGOs in Ukraine. And I'd like to be more specific, maybe, about Ukraine, about Roma people in Ukraine, and just to clarify something that was already mentioned. Yes, truly. We've had this 2 years ago. We've had this flow of attacks against Roma camps, not just those who live in Zakarpattia. So not even even the temporary camps. So people living close to forests in Lviv. We have approximately 10 of these temporary camps, and this flow of attacks, of raids. In Lviv, in Ivano-Frankivsk, in the Kyiv region, we had this flow initiated by the right-wing organizations. Unfortunately, the media used the hate speech, even supported. The media somehow supported with their statements the right-wing representatives, and no one was punished. And the perpetrators, absolutely enjoyed this impunity. What is the result? So here in Lviv region, what we had. A young Roma man was killed, David. And during the attack, the other young man was stabbed 3 times with a knife. A woman also was stabbed with a knife twice. And unfortunately, so these were animals, these were not people, those who were attacked. And a 10-year-old child also, unfortunately, was stabbed by a knife. So we seized the perpetrators. Others, unfortunately, managed to flee, and we brought this case to the court. Maybe this is the only case out of all the attacks that still is under investigation, under trial, and we do hope that the perpetrators will be punished. But despite all these objective characteristics, so the hate crime, unfortunately, the Article 161, it's really hard to prove. So basically no practice, no court practice. That's why radicals, they still feel themselves as omnipotent. And I just want to clarify that they call themselves, so the sober youth, they call themselves, those who attacked the temporary camps.
That's very scary to hear, yeah. I think, again, this issue of more work that needs to be done with law enforcement and awareness raising, and to stop impunity to such cases. I think for me to listen to these cases is a wake up.
First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude for actually opportunity to talk about this, and we do need to talk about this. I want everyone else to listen to that, to recognize that we just need certain actions to be taken, because what I worry about how the media do feel, which still use the hate speech in their messages. They let xenophobic people to express their ideas freely on TV and radio and comments, where we have new, right in comments in Facebook instantly, people start even planning new raids and new campaigns against Roma people. So basically, the public does not respect properly. That's why we have more and more of these things. The only positive thing I may say is that police today is activating its dialogue with Roma people and activists who respond quickly. And activists, I guess, are the only bridge between Roma people and the state. So the impunity consequences, we have the deepened discrimination. Roma people are not present in all areas. They cannot apply for a job. They cannot educate their children.
Yeah, I think it's good to hear, and I think the work of activists is so important. If you don't mind, Nikolai, I wanted to pass it on to Viola Popenko, because you also know about these issues and can also perhaps speak some on the triple discriminations. Please, Viola.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And it's really nice for me to know that almost all the colleagues who presented their ideas, they mentioned Roma people. I am a Roma woman myself, and I do feel really pleased. And I'm so grateful for your solidarity with us, for your support. But, I was preparing for the following discussion related to the efficiency of tools on how to tackle discrimination. Well, taking into account this, my huge experience of working in the Women's Fund Chirikli, I'd like to share with you, I'd like to present some very efficient instruments on how to tackle discrimination against Roma in particular. I just want to note that in my presentation, I will stress on the specificity of Roma women situation and also the hate crimes. So coming to Roma women in Ukraine and their context in Roma communities, there are certain traditions or cultural peculiarities which do not let Roma women to enjoy their rights, to enjoy their rights in full scope. Unfortunately, Roma women suffer from multiple discrimination, as we mentioned, so gender-based, ethnic origin-based, they're being discriminated all the time. And taking into account our experience, I'd like to stress that one of the most efficient methods on tackling the discrimination and for us to finally integrate the Roma communities is education of Roma girls, educating Roma girls, because these leads to positive changes and transformations in the community. Also, Roma mediators, we need to intensify their actions. Those who cooperate with local self-governance bodies, they help us to collect data. And also at the state level, we need to have this profession be recognized officially, mediator. Also, a participation of Roma women in decision-making process at all levels and in political processes as well. So the hate speech, yes. What helps us actually to monitor and to respond to hate speech and also to hate crimes that are being committed? So we do value so much our cooperation with the Ombudsman's office in Ukraine. They do actively respond to these crimes, and we just need to... I remember this recent case that we had in Ivano-Frankivsk when the mayor of Ivano-Frankivsk, so 10 Roma families, according to his order, and with the support of law enforcement, they were brought to the border line with Zakarpattia. And when mayor and some public officials, they used the hate speech quite actively, and we remember how active was the role of ombudsman. So I'm very grateful to Ms. Ombudsman. Also, the victims of discrimination, I can say that quite efficient it is to monitor the trial itself and provide certain legal aid and legal advice, and if necessary, request to international judicial bodies, and Ukraine falls under its jurisdiction as well. Also, Ukrainian legislation is quite obsolete, because in Ukrainian legislation, we consider that we need to intensify the liability for hate speech and hate crimes. Also, we need to revise or even to update the law on national minorities of Ukraine. Also, if we talk separately about the Roma community, so we need, Ukrainian state must implement efficient policy on national minorities, including Roma people. In particular, we need to design the Roma strategy, which must include measurable certain measures with KPIs, clear KPIs. And of course, the gender component and anti-discriminatory component must be very powerful in this strategy. So thank you for your attention, dear ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much. And you've given like such an impressive sort of to-do list, you know, of all of the things that we need to do. And certainly I know that the work that you are doing on the ground is so important. We had recently Julian from Cherikli speak about the situation for Roma in context of the COVID-19. So I know the good work of your organization, but you also mentioned the role of internationals, and you need to sort of rely on us, and certainly all I can speak on not just for the UN, but for many others that are really want to do more and to be advocates for these important actions to be taken. I want to pass it now to Svetlana Zagori from Luhansk. Please, Svetlana, and I think you still can share with us also on this other question. Please go ahead. You're muted. You need to press the unmute button. Svetlana. Yes.
Do you hear me well? So good afternoon. Good afternoon. You know, for me it's very interesting. It's quite valuable to take part in this important discussion concerning the Roma community. Our NGO, for the first time during this extended period, we've started working with Roma community as well. We have more than 4% of population in our region. These are Roma people, and we've launched a project. In partnership with the law enforcement, we've launched a project on how to support Roma people. Also with social services, we've involved them. We've understood that there are so many needs of Roma people, so many problems, and we just want to study the situation and learn how to provide them with better services for them to be active citizens of our region. We really do need this kind of work, and what I heard from you, it's really valuable. So today I heard a lot of theoretical, let's say, material, but I maybe will tell about something that is painful for me. I was born in Luhansk region. I live in Luhansk region. This is Donbass. And, you know, I've never read about discrimination when it comes to territorial, let's say, origin. But today, you know, that it exists. Discrimination based on territorial origin. You know, in 2014, I heard this statement, Donbass must be surrounded, you know, by a fence, by a prison fence. You know, this was really insulting. And, you know, when I took part in the forum in Kiev and I was in one of the groups as a participant, I heard from the moderator, in Donbass, we have only bandits, drug addicts, and alcoholics. You know, I could actually somehow refute that and stand against that. So it's not, no, it doesn't look like that. So Donbass is not a region where like we have only scum living, but unfortunately we have this opinion still among people. Please do visit Luhansk region. Please do see that in Eastern Ukraine we have absolutely adequate, normal people just like you. So this is a region where miners do live. So we extract coal. We have 53 nationalities present in the region. So what I again mentioned, what is very important for us, and what do we feel? The language issue. That's where we are discriminated. The language issue. We know Ukrainian. Ukrainian is a state language, official state language, but we have villages where 90% of people are Russian speaking. and we cannot prohibit them to talk. But the attitude to Russian or Ukrainian, people come and so people do come and tell that, yes, we speak Russian. We don't have any Russian school in the region. This is a wish of people to have a Russian school in the region because geographically, like, we have these preconditions. How to solve this problem? Maybe we can solve it. Another painful issue today for us that in autumn we'll have the elections to local councils. For some, maybe in the law, some people do not see any problems in the law on elections. But yesterday we've had this discussion, and when the distance to the first to the electoral poll station 5 or 6 kilometers, and there is no proper connection. People don't have transport. For example, when one station actually accumulates people from 3 villages. How to deal with that situation? So simply, state does not help us with a solution. They tell that we cannot somehow change the situation, but the problem is there. So the right to access to electoral station, for example, when we have the station located at the second floor of the premise, so not many people can actually access it. Something can be tackled at local level, but something should be tackled at national level. With the discrimination, we quite often face discrimination when it comes to age discrimination, sex discrimination, or gender discrimination. We talk about Roma people. I personally helped Roma people to find jobs, and maybe I use my reputation somehow. I even told the employers that I do stand for these people, that I promise that these would be the best employees. So the situation that we face today, it requires, I guess, this special approach. But it's already 7th year when we live in the war.
Mm-hmm. You've raised such important issues. I can tell you all, for me, because I'm also humanitarian coordinator, I think I've visited Luhansk more than I visited most other parts of Ukraine, and met so many amazing people. So and great to hear about the good work that you're doing. And I do think that, for me, when I think about what needs to be done, sometimes there's a lot of focus on the problems with the East and the way the Eastern Oblasts are being perceived. But I think to resolve that, there needs to be work in every oblast. There needs to be work in all Ukraine to understand that Eastern Ukraine is part of all of Ukraine, and that not to have that different approach that is also in a way discriminatory. But I think you've raised that very important also issue of language, which is a very complex and painful issue, and certainly we are also advocating for that law on minority languages and more discussion on these issues. I think it's perhaps not discussed enough, and that is also, I think, very much relevant to our conversation today, and very painful. I think we have 2 colleagues from Slavic Heart, so if you could maybe together, since we're sort of running after time, and then we have, I think, after you 4 more people. So 2 more people. So maybe we could hear from you about the work of your organization and your impressions. So this is Natalia and Katerina.
So good afternoon to everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. So a lot of the things that was mentioned by previous speakers, I do agree with many of these issues, and I'm really grateful that Svetlana drew our attention to the military context, conflict context, and the discrimination that people face. But we will talk about women, our organization. So we protect the women's rights, and we again operate within the territory of the military conflict in eastern Ukraine. And we'd like to draw your attention, first of all. I think it's not a secret for you that gender-based violence is an early manifestation of discrimination when it comes to women. So under conditions of military conflict, unfortunately, we don't observe proper attention to this problem. So we have discussions. Yes, we have these discussions at all levels. I don't know how it will be in Ukrainian. So people are very concerned, as they always are, but no specific steps are taken to help women, to help girls who suffer from sexual exploitation, sexual abuse under conditions of the military conflict. There is no proper response from the international level, at national level. We don't see it. We don't observe this support. Every day we face a situation, we face these horrible manifestations of violence towards women. COVID-19 aggravated this problem, and women do not get proper support, despite the fact that we have the applicable legislation, and it, let's say, must protect women and girls. Legislation that should protect women and girls from abuse by the combatants. We don't have it, and it's not even discussed today. So this is quite an acute problem. Just to draw your attention, in my opinion, it's very important to be brave and to give proper names to proper phenomena if you want to fight discrimination, racism towards different categories of people. Speaking about the reasons of these manifestations, is that what we observe, it all starts at the state level. It was already mentioned today a lot. First, from the beginning of our discussion, we spoke about hate speech. Recently, more and more of that hate speech we do observe within messages, all this narrative that we get from state officials, from the top level, and other stakeholders, representatives of MPs. And this is unacceptable at the state level, because this somehow gives a right to other people. It somehow frees other people from any responsibility, and they also use that narrative. It was mentioned again so much today about the impunity. So we need to punish discrimination and racism cases. Those issues related to protection of women's rights. We also observe a lot of impunity. We are the members of the national network of women's organizations, and recently we've advocated again the ratification of Istanbul Convention, and we were monitoring the public statements on violence towards women in media, in mass media. Every day we've traced 19, 20, or even more from each of us, and these cases become more and more violent, and there is no proper liability. People not held liable. So we want to request first, if it's possible, please do. So our state officials must clearly understand that it's absolutely unacceptable to use those messages and statements. We need to form certain non-discriminatory agenda for our state, and each of us must accept this, that we all are different, we all are diverse, but we are still great with our diversity. We have a huge crisis of tolerance in our country, and we step away from liberal values, and it's of huge concern. Right-wing movements, right-wing organizations, quite often they are supported even by the state, even at the state level. And this is the last thing to say. We did not mention it, but in the context of our work, this is also a very important stakeholder, the Council of Churches, and they contribute, if I can say this, absolutely destructive contribution. So they do support all these manifestations, the hate speech, they do support it. Hate speech when it comes to LGBTI representatives, reproductive health issues. They also have their opinion on protection of women's rights. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And I hear you loud and clear, and so much work also on the hate speech to be done on gender-based violence. Certainly it's a huge problem in Ukraine. I know that from the UN side, several organizations are trying to work on this, and there are mobile teams and more crisis centers and more services for women, but certainly not enough. And cooperation with your organization is very important. And we can hear more now from Katerina. Natalia, sorry. Natalia, please.
Пані Наталю, чи хочете ви додати до виступу своєї колеги?
So, Ms. Natalia, maybe something to be added. Do you hear me well? Very good. Thank you. I will not take much of your time because everything was mentioned by Katya, key aspects that we face, key moments that we face. But if we talk about discrimination and racial discrimination in Ukraine, I think it's not enough for us to have these 2 hours of discussion, and maybe still it's not enough to spend all the 2 hours because there is a problem. It's quite an acute problem, and it's on the agenda, and a lot is related to our identity. If we take, for example, historical context, so I will not take your time.
Thank you.
Support all the participants. I just want to support them.
Thank you so much. And you're right. You're absolutely right. This is not enough time, but anyway, but I'm still glad that we're having this discussion today, and I hope more will follow. Before, I invited Viola to speak earlier on what methods, what instruments, what do we need to do, how do we move the agenda forward. So I think Viola Popenko already shared with us some very good lists. But now on that particular topic, I'd like to invite Irina Fedorovich, and then afterwards, finally, we'll hear from Nargis Mod, who is the UN Youth Delegate. So first, Irina, please.
Доброго дня, колеги. Дуже дякую за надане слово.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Thank you for invitation. Just not to repeat what's already mentioned, a couple of more aspects to add. Well, first of all, when we speak about efficient tools and instruments on fighting the discrimination in this context, I just use the broad context because we mentioned different manifestations of discrimination. What do we actually lack in Ukraine comparing to the situation of 10 years ago? Impunity. This is the most important aspect. If we take a closer look at which recommendations Ukraine gets when we do report in front of UN. So everything is articulated, all the problems are recognized, but when it comes to daily discrimination, I think it's somehow missed by our international partners, and there is not enough concern for that. And that's where the impunity grows out, the first part. And I think that due to that, we cannot successfully fight other manifestations and achieve these changes and finalize these changes, implement these transformations. So, legislative amendments as a tool. So we already have it all written in the state plans, national plans, but these national plans are not implemented. So the National Strategy on Human Rights, the non-discrimination block, the results of the study, less than 25% were implemented, of the measures were implemented within the 5 years. So educational transformations, legislative amendments, public opinion. So this all was not implemented simply by the state. And another problem that we have is the lack of consolidation and organization of state bodies, because I don't want to speak about the interagency working group on racism. You, I think, remember that one from the previous convocation. It wasn't successful, but still we don't have coordination at the level of state government and cabinet of ministers on who should do what, so the delegation of roles and tasks. It again adds up to that. So someone is doing something, they have their own understanding of the problem, but they don't have this general result, common result. So streamlined result. What wasn't mentioned? Statistics and data collection. This is the problem when it comes to discrimination, because separate state bodies, they do collect something, but the institution which would accumulate and analyze it and at least talk about certain general trends, I think it still does not take enough efforts. I speak about the Office of Verkhovna Rada Commission on Human Rights. This is the institution that is responsible for the equality issues in the country. They collect their own statistics, they publish it. We speak about the requests of citizens they sent to the Office of the Commissioner, but more attention should be drawn to the statistics of other bodies. We need to accumulate it. Apart from advocating and updating the statistics, and maybe we can somehow even generate the trends, get this general background, because only the CSOs are analyzing the statistics. Yes, I will stop at that, but I don't have enough time maybe for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you've raised, the whole issue again of impunity and how do you move that agenda forward, but also the evidence, the statistics that is also missing and more needs to be done. But you've also again given us some homework to do more. I'd like to then pass it on to Nargiz. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great.
Добрий день. Перш за все, дякую за запрошення. Мені дійсно дуже...
First of all, thank you for inviting. For me, it was really interesting to get all the previous speakers' ideas and to find out on how they fight discrimination in our society. So I just want to add that I was so lucky in Odessa. We have so many cultures present and not so much discrimination on everyday level, like the cities, but we do have it still. We need to recognize it, because only if we recognize we can tackle it. What do we do? For so many years, I've been a volunteer of the CSO, founded by the Afghani representatives, the Friendship Foundation, and they launched so many educational cultural projects. The Sunday school, where children learned about their culture and history, where Afghani children learned about Ukrainian culture and history. And that's how we help these children to learn about their culture and integrate into Ukrainian culture. For me, this is a recipe of modern discrimination tackling, because when you recognize that you have your own culture and you respect the culture of other people, you know more about it, you start actually taking it seriously, respecting it. We cannot respect something when we are afraid of something. This is my personal experience. And again, the UN, I'm a UN youth delegate, a participant of this program. I talk to so many young people from other countries of the world. They also complain, even from European countries, they also complain that they were discriminated or their friends were discriminated. As for me, the fundamental tool to fight discrimination, of course, the civil education. It must start at school, at secondary school. We must teach our children to do that first. Civil education in communities. We will try to do it now, Afghani community in this Sunday school, on the basis of Sunday school, and in other communities. And this course must, first of all, it must be informal. I'm a big fan of informal education. I think it's very efficient, especially when it comes to tolerance, awareness, and non-discrimination. So not just in communities, this course to be presented, but in state schools and public schools as well. As for me, when we year by year gradually teach our children to be tolerant, we will build a healthy society, anti-discriminatory. Also, I want to stress that when we give our young people, when we teach our young people, it's not an investment into future. We invest into present. They become open-minded. They come to their parents after school. They tell about gender equality, ethnic equality. They actually start telling that discrimination is an improper way of behavior, and today we will make our society better. We'll start from that. So I do think that we need to start from schools, from young people, working with young people, and I'm not sure whether this was mentioned, but as for me, I think we need to have a very active media campaign, awareness raising campaign. Please don't ignore the internet. We have so many young people staying there, bloggers and opinion leaders. We do have that because they can translate this message. The last thing I'd like to stress on is, for me, what is quite efficient. Fighting discrimination by interacting between the communities. I'm so grateful to an agency working with the refugees because due to efforts of this institution, our communities in Odessa, they are we have this very high level of cohesion, and communities, they do talk to each other respectfully and with mutual respect. We have so many joint projects and events, and we can find out more about each other, and that's how we can build peaceful and prosperous interaction, fruitful interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Nargis, so much. And I think there was a question, I think, on the side on what more can be done in education, and I think you've given some really good examples, and I think that's maybe some of it needs to be put into curriculum in a more formal way, but then that cooperation between international organizations, you mentioned UNHCR, and then that does a lot of work, and very glad to hear about that, but also other organizations like UNICEF and others that can perhaps give more advice. But colleagues, there's been so much. It's been a very rich discussion. I think a lot of the comments were made, vis-a-vis government that needs to do more, but not just. I think the lawmakers in Parliament, the fact that it's not enough to pass legislation, but how well is it enforced, and the whole issue of, in general, enforcement versus impunity and justice for on cases of violence and racist hatred, and then the role of media and internet, I think, is also very, very important. I think for me, living here now for 2 years, I think I admire this country so much. It's so beautiful, the strength of the people. But I think the future that I see for this country really depends on moving towards that agenda of tolerance, of peace, of embracing diversity. Such a big country with so many differences, it has to be looked at in a positive way as the strength of Ukraine, not something that divides it. So from speaking from all of my colleagues in the UN, really, I hope that we overcome this COVID crisis soon, so that maybe I can visit you in some of your, locations and get a chance to meet you here, perhaps in the UN house, and have more discussions like this. But I'm very happy that at least we mainstreamed this conversation. So I think a lot of people listened, and we will probably collect some more information that will be synthesized on the UN Facebook. And please do keep in touch, and I hope to get to meet you soon, and keep healthy, keep safe. I want to send this message that now that things are opening up, the virus is not gone, so please protect yourself and follow the World Health Organization recommendations closely. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, колеги. Якщо ще будуть якісь додаткові коментарі, які не встигли...
Dear colleagues, if any additional comments you do have, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you so much. Bye. Boy.